So the strongest zeitgeber is light. All the other stuff is important, but it pales in comparison, no pun intended, to the fact that light is the dominant way that all your biological systems know how to behave properly.
Sleep and burnout. That's what we're talking about on today's classic episode of Spartan Up Podcast. Today, classic clips from 3 experts who'll explain why you need more sleep, why it's so hard to get. You'll be hearing from Dr. Andrew Huberman, Arianna Huffington, and our own Dr. Nada. Stay until the end of this episode when Dr. Nada will share 5 concrete tips you can use to improve your bedtime routine to get better sleep. This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Their innovative process allows them to brew great tasting craft beer without the alcohol. New customers can get 10% off their entire order with the code SPARTAN10, limit 1 per customer. Arianna Huffington has taken a deep dive into the causes of burnout and the cures.
Let's get into why you first started Huffington Post.
Well, I started the Huffington Post in 2005. And then in 2007, I collapsed from burnout, exhaustion, sleep deprivation. And that was the beginning of my journey to recognize that, in fact, this is a collective delusion we're living under, that you need to burn out in order to succeed. And where you and I see the world eye to eye is that, in fact, when you take care of yourself, your performance improves. The first thing is, when you suddenly collapse, I broke my cheekbone, and you end up going through a series of tests. And I was literally diagnosed with burnout, which now was recognized by the World Health Organization last spring as an occupational hazard. Literally hundreds of millions of people are suffering from burnout. And it affects both our physical health. We see the increase in chronic diseases like hypertension and diabetes, which are very connected to stress and burnout. But we also see it in the mental health crisis.
Why do people like you and me and 100 other million people, how did we grow up? Why do we burn out? Why do we get after it to a level where we eventually collapse?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the culture we're living in. Just look at the way we talk. The famous song, "I'll sleep when I'm dead," or "you snooze, you lose," or the presumption that you just power through exhaustion. And when we look at the data and the science, we see that, in fact, we are much more effective and much more productive when we also take care of ourselves. I think the key around sleep, one of the many micro steps at Thrive that we recommend around sleep is not to sleep with your phone by your bed.
I agree. I learned that a few years ago. I started putting on airplane mode, and it really changed everything.
Yeah, but even better, don't even have it near you. The truth is that even if it's near you, it's a reminder of all the projects and the problems and everything you have to deal with the next morning. So charge it outside your bedroom. We have 4 journeys. The first is recharge, which is sleep and 60-second reset times during the day. The truth is that it takes 60 seconds to reset from stress for the cortisol hormone to leave your body. So sleep and reset so that we don't let stress become cumulative. The second journey is fuel. What are we eating and how much are we moving? Both essential. And the key is how much can you reduce processed foods and sugar. As you know, these are like the poisons. The third journey is about connection. Connection starts with ourselves, and then our connection with others, and finally focus. A lot of people, all of us in some way, are so addicted to our phones and to social media that we have a hard time focusing, and especially now with the stress and uncertainty of the pandemic, we are finding a lot of people having a very hard time concentrating. In fact, Google searches, how do I get my brain to focus, are up 300%.
Wow.
The key thing is to start small, because otherwise it becomes overwhelming and you may do it for 2 weeks and then you stop. So we call our micro steps too small to fail. Like in the morning, a micro step is take 60 seconds to course correct from this transition, from sleep to waking. Most people just go immediately to their phones, and their brain is not even fully awake. So I think if you take even the 60 seconds to just remember what you're grateful for, to set your intention for the day, to take some deep breaths, whatever you want, then you are more ready to deal with the day.
I like that. I like the great samurai, the ancient samurai. When they went to bed at night, they would close their eyes and they would envision all of their possessions burning to the ground. And when they woke up, they had gratitude because they had it all. They still had it all. So I like this idea of being grateful. I like your idea of more connections, human connections, right? We don't have human connections anymore. We have phone connections.
Yes. My message is very simple. Recognize that recharging is really part of performance. That as athletes show us, recovery is part of performance. So make sure that you introduce these micro steps in your life. Recognize that sleep is not optional. It's foundational. We have thousands of sleep centers now that tell us the same thing. But so is what are we eating, how much are we moving, and what are the thoughts we hold in our heads. I think especially now people are feeling so uncertain and anxious about the future that we tend to imagine the worst. So I have a little saying by the French philosopher Montaigne on my desk that says, there were many terrible things in my life, but most of them never happened. The truth is that often our mind just imagines the worst.
Walk us through a typical day. We're going to wake up. What time are we waking up?
Oh, I don't wake up at the same time. I need 8 hours of sleep. People need between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. They need to find out what is the optimal amount of time for them, unless they have a genetic mutation. Maybe you have a genetic mutation, Joe. 1.5% of the population doesn't need a lot of sleep genetically. Whatever it is, for me, what matters is getting that amount of sleep. And then having that minute, I take more than a minute because I love to meditate in the morning. Then I work out. And then I get ready for my day. And when I'm fully recharged, I love my day. And for me, bringing that joy into what I'm doing is really key.
And then what time is your last meal? Do you eat close to bed or do you finish earlier?
I love intermittent fasting. And I have a minimum of 3 hours between a meal and sleep. But I love to have a great big salad even earlier and have more time before I sleep. I think that makes my sleep better, and we have so much great data now about taking some time when your body is not digesting, but instead is metabolically recharging.
We'll be right back to the interview. But first, a little bit from Athletic Brewing Company, today's sponsor. You don't have to choose between an ice-cold beer after a race and your health, thanks to Athletic Brewing Company. Athletic Brewing Company's innovative process allows them to brew great-tasting craft beers without the alcohol, from IPAs to stouts to golden ales and more. They offer a full selection of beers, starting at only 50 calories, so you can keep your head clear and enjoy the refreshing taste of beer anytime and anywhere. And they're part of a program called Two for the Trails. For every product purchased, Athletic Brewing Company donates 2% of sales to protecting and restoring local trails. They're pioneering a craft brew revolution. You don't have to sacrifice being your best to enjoy a great brew. In fact, check out their website to see a list of awards that their beers have won. Check your local store, but if you can't find it, they'll ship it. Place an order at athleticbrewing.com, and you can get free shipping on 2 six-packs or more. And new customers can save 10% off the entire order with the code Spartan10, limit 1 per customer. The day Joe DeSena interviewed Andrew Huberman, he had just woken up from a mid-afternoon nap, and that's what started their conversation about the neuroscience of sleep.
I just actually was napping. I'm embarrassed to say, but since you're with me here, I was napping. And what are your thoughts on napping? Does that help?
Well, first of all, let's remove the embarrassment by putting some neuroscience on it. I would say you were learning. You were getting better. And here's why. There is now ample evidence, experimental evidence in animal models and in humans that neuroplasticity, this ability of the brain to change in response to experience, so it could be physical skill learning or mental skill learning, that's a 2-part process. Everything in biology is a process, not an event. And it's a 2-part process. And the first part of that process is there's a trigger, meaning there's something that stimulates changes in those neurons. And just merely going through your day isn't going to trigger neuroplasticity. The idea that everything we do in experience changes our brain, that's just false. That's true when you're a child. It's especially true when you're a child. But after about age 25, just moving through your day is largely reflexive behavior. And we don't change much in response to that. However, if in the last 48 to 72 hours, you did anything that was intentionally geared toward changing your brain, maybe it was reading, maybe it was a important conversation with your partner or a friend, or you did some skill learning or some effort-based action, exercise, you marked particular synapses in your brain for change, for neuroplasticity, but they don't have to change. The only way that they're going to change is during periods of rest. And there are 3 periods of rest that are important for neuroplasticity. The first is deep sleep, in particular slow wave sleep. Many people think it's REM sleep, but it's mostly slow wave sleep when those changes actually occur. The other is brief naps, which the experimental data, so a recent paper published in Cell Reports, shows that naps of about 20 minutes where you don't go into REM, so non-REM shallow sleep, as well as a third type of rest, which is when you just go into what I call deliberate decompression, when you're just let your mind go. You're not looking at your phone, you're not scrolling Instagram, you might be taking a walk, you might be even in conversation, but you let go of the attentional mechanisms of the brain. Those are the 3 periods of time in which we know that the brain rewires and gets better. And this is why people can practice a tennis serve over and over and over, and then take some time away from it, and 2 days later they come back and they nail it. So I would say you were napping, but there's no embarrassment required. You were absolutely getting better at whatever it is that you were trying to get better at. And we've all heard a lot in recent years about all the terrible things that are going to happen if we don't get enough sleep. We're going to get dementia. We're going to, break down all these terrible things. One of the things that my lab has been focused on, and in my public education efforts, what I've been focused on is trying to give some tools as to how people can sleep better, because I think we've heard enough about sleep being important, and now it's sort of like, okay, but how do I get better at sleeping? We've heard so much about it, in fact, that people are starting to get a kind of sleep-related anxiety, which is its own form of insomnia. So one thing that we're really focused on in my lab is how some of the things like deep relaxation can give the brain access to states that even mimic sleep and give you the capacity to fall asleep and stay asleep better.
Yeah, so that was my next question about, like, how do we hack slow wave sleep? Because it sounds like all of us need a little more of that. So is there a way to hack that?
Yeah. So there are really 3 approaches that I recommend to anybody trying to adjust anything in terms of their nervous system, whether or not sleep or performance of any kind. And that's always going to be to look to behavioral changes first. Then you have to look to kind of diet. And then I would say third to supplementation. And then fourth, if there's an important need, then you could look to, sort of prescription drugs, of course, working with the folks who write prescriptions or physicians, of which I am not. You really want to avoid bright lights of all colors, not just blue, from the hours of about 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. I don't want to go too deep into the study, but there was a beautiful study done by my friend Samar Hattar, who's head of the chronobiology unit at the National Institutes of Health, and a guy named David Burson at Brown University, not far from you, showing that bright light exposure in the middle of the night, not once, but on a regular basis, does two very bad things. First of all, it suppresses the release of this feel-good chemical dopamine and can lead to pro-depressive effects and deficits in learning and memory. That was very clearly shown. And in addition to that, a separate paper showed that the brain structure that this acts on is in communication through a direct connection, a neural connection, wires literally, to the pancreas, and it can start disrupting blood sugar regulation. So this doesn't mean that you can't look at your phone for a moment in the middle of the night or a tablet, but try and keep the screen dim. If you wake up and you go to the bathroom, keep the lights dim. And even better, keep the lights low in your physical environment. The cells that wake up your body, that are in your retina, that signal the wake up signal to your rest of your brain and body, they live in the bottom half of your eye and they view the upper visual field. They were designed to view the sun. So if you keep lights at kind of desk level or floor level, you're way better off than if you have overhead lights. But it is very important. We're seeing a lot of mental health issues, performance issues. I mean, we're talking about the brain to pancreas connection, blood sugar. We're talking about testosterone and estrogen levels. We're talking about cortisol levels being dysregulated. A lot of bad things happen from getting too much light in the middle of the night on a regular basis. Now, for shift workers and people that are traveling and jet lag, that's a separate discussion. We'd probably need about a half hour to kind of hack into each one of their situations. But because there's a way to offset that, but I can make it short and just say the best way to offset nighttime light exposure is two ways. One is to get that morning light that we talked about before. The other is there's a beautiful study. I wish my lab had done this, but we didn't. Beautiful study showing that evening or late afternoon sunlight helps offset some of the negative effects of light in the middle of the night. And the way it does that is your brain and body want to anchor to as many regularities as they can. We always hear about homeostasis. The body wants homeostasis. Well, life isn't homeostatic. Things are happening all the time. You wake up in the middle of the night, a kid cries, your partner snores, whatever. You turn on a light. But by getting that morning sunlight and that evening light, you're giving every cell in your body the information it needs about timing. It can anchor to something. And we love to be able to do this with food because, eating schedules are also a strong determinant of biological cycles. And so are when you exercise. But, it's very hard sometimes to get your meals on an exact regimen. I mean, unless you're really like neurotic, 6 meal a day type person, or even 4 meal a day, it's very hard. And so you can create the regularity with the sunlight. Sunlight is the strongest, what we call zeitgeber, which is German for timekeeper, because the folks that discovered this were German. So the strongest zeitgeber is light. All the other stuff is important, but it pales in comparison, no pun intended, to the fact that light is the dominant way that all your biological systems know how to behave properly.
Yeah, that's the story I've been telling. Because I'm dying for my family to wake up super early and go to bed early, right? That's the battle a lot of people have with their family. And the argument I've been making, which was not based on any science, simply logic, for all these years we've been on the planet, we probably woke up when the sun came up and we probably went to bed when the sun went down. It just made sense to me. I don't know. We didn't have light bulbs.
Well, you're absolutely right in this argument. So the Earth spins once every 24 hours. That's a non-negotiable fact of the galaxy, okay? And every cell in our body has a clock that runs on a 24-hour schedule. It's a little off from 24 hours. Sometimes people have a schedule that runs a little longer, sometimes a little shorter, and that will make them night owls or morning people. If you really want to become a morning person, it's very straightforward. You have to force exercise first thing in the morning. You have to get light in your eyes first thing in the morning. And you have to ideally you start going to sleep a little bit earlier, but for some people that's hard to do. Now I mentioned behavioral, dietary, and then supplementation. Now my lab doesn't work on the dietary and supplementation part. So I want to highlight the fact that what I'm about to describe now, it can be and generally is very helpful to a lot of people, but the behavioral stuff is the most important. So a lot of people here nowadays, you're not supposed to eat past 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. or too close to bedtime. But then we also hear that there's this calming reflex, the parasympathetic nervous system, it's sometimes called the rest and digest. Well, that's that advice is contradictory. So what is it? Well, it turns out that actually eating carbohydrate-rich foods or things like turkey and white meats actually promote the release of amino acids like tryptophan, which make us sleepy. So does that mean you should stuff yourself with carbohydrates right before bed? No, but many people, not all, find that shifting their complex carbohydrate intake to periods of time in which, assuming they just didn't have intense exercise, which is a separate issue, closer to sleep actually helps them sleep more deeply. So a lot of people are on these low-carb diets, which I don't necessarily have a problem with, are doing it exactly backwards. You want to be alert, you reduce your number of carbohydrates to promote the things like dopamine and acetylcholine, and we can talk about those. If you want to be sleepy and you want to sleep deeply, you eat foods that promote promote tryptophan release and serotonin production and GABA production. So a lot of people are doing it kind of backwards, and they're doing it for body composition reasons, but they have it kind of inverted. And so in general, it's best to, if you're going to follow a kind of moderate to carbohydrate regimen, to push those towards times when you want to be relaxed or you just had very intense glycogen depleting exercise. Now, the third category is supplementation. I don't sell supplements. It's not my thing. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a professor, so I profess things. I don't prescribe them. So you have to check with your doctor. But there are two supplements in particular that I think many people benefit from. One is L-theanine, Theanine. 100 to 200 milligrams of L-theanine promotes the release of GABA, which helps people turn off their kind of thinking, their forebrain ruminating, and helps them fall asleep. And the other is magnesium threonate. And the form of magnesium turns out to be important here, which is THREONATE. Those two in combination for a lot of people can act as a soporific, help them get to sleep. And for most people will be safe, although you should definitely check with your doctor. I do not recommend taking melatonin. Melatonin should come from your pineal naturally. You do not want to supplement melatonin, in my opinion. And here's why. Melatonin's primary role is to suppress puberty during development. It's chronically high in kids. It's one of the reasons they're sleeping all the time too. So, people are taking melatonin, and it could potentially, there are great reviews and articles about this, could potentially have some pretty negative effects on the testosterone and estrogen axis. And so I think people overemphasize melatonin and Ambien and things like that, and they underemphasize light and diet and the structure and timing of their diet and some of the safer supplements, in my opinion, that can really help promote depth of sleep, in particular slow wave sleep.
And finally, 5 concrete steps you can take to improve your bedtime routine with Dr. Nada.
We're talking about how to get a good night's sleep and 5 ways that can really help. Number 1, you're using electronics right before you fall asleep. We've all done it, spending minutes or even hours scrolling through social media before bed. Researchers have found that people who use electronics before bed saw a significant reduction of melatonin in their body, a chemical that regulates our body's sleep patterns, and we talk about it in another episode. So the decreased levels of melatonin in your body make it harder to fall asleep. So replace your phone with a book or a newspaper for a much better ritual. Number 2, you're drinking caffeine within a few hours of going to sleep. Caffeine is a stimulant, and it can make it hard for you to fall asleep. So try to make your last cup more than 3 hours before bedtime, even more if you're highly sensitive to caffeine. If you're looking for a warm drink before bed, many herbal teas like chamomile can help you relax and reduce stress right before bed. Number 3, you're eating right before you go to sleep. Always try to finish eating at least 3 hours before bed. Why? Well, eating increases your blood sugar and your insulin levels, which in turn make it much harder for you to fall asleep. Number 4, your bedtime is all over the place. If some nights you go to bed at 2 a.m. and other nights you go to bed at 9 p.m., your body's circadian rhythm isn't syncing up. By having a consistent bedtime, your body gets used to falling asleep and waking up at the same times, which can make you much more alert in the morning. A good solution: try to go to bed at the same time every night. Number 5, your bedroom is too warm. While sleeping, your body temp naturally begins to dip. Sleeping in a room that's more than about 68 degrees can make it much harder for your body to fall asleep. If it's too hot, you'll be battling with your covers all night. In short, pick a time to go to sleep, wind down before that time, and don't let distractions like eating or talking on the phone get in the way of winding down. You'll likely wake up rested and ready for a new day.
Thanks for listening to this classic episode of Spartan Up Podcast. We want you to drive yourself to success every day, but we know many of you are taking on new challenges, especially at this time of the year. And without the right mindset, it's easy to let those new challenges, those new promises fall by the wayside. Stick with us. Subscribe to the podcast. Listen to Spartan Up. We're here 3 days a week to motivate you, to inspire you, to bring you new techniques. We are your virtual partner in resilience, here to stand at your side as you take on new challenges. This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Their innovative process allows them to brew great tasting craft beer without the alcohol. New customers can get 10% off their entire order with the code SPARTAN10, limit 1 per customer.